Welcome to the Teen Take, where Gen Z breaks down politics in plain language. I'm your host, Thaddeus. Today's episode covers a lot from the Marines and National Guard finally pulling out of Los Angeles to teen voting rights in the United Kingdom, Trump's latest drama, and climate concerns that hit close to home. Earlier this month, the streets of Los Angeles looked more like a war zone than a city. Armored vehicles, riot gear, and tear gas filled the air, all part of a deployment authorized by the Trump administration that sent the California National Guard into neighborhoods across Los Angeles and beyond. You might remember MacArthur Park, which I reported on last week, was just a few weeks ago full of kids at summer camp, became the center of attention after a shocking Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, operation left families shaken and trust in public safety shattered. Now, 38 days later, the California National Guard is finally being released from active duty, along with the United States Marines after 42 days. Their mission, which was framed by the White House as an operation in response to the illegal immigration threats and civil disorder, has come under intense criticism from city leaders, civil rights advocates, and everyday citizens who felt the weight of a military presence in their backyards. Literally. Mayor Karen Bass, who's been vocal throughout this whole situation, described the deployment as an overreach and called for its immediate de-escalation. She is joined by California's Governor Gavin Newsom, who President Trump has openly criticized, and several members of the California congressional delegation who say the presence of armed troops in parks and public spaces during the summer months was, in their words, dangerous and unnecessary. For me, this isn't just a headline, this is a reminder of how powerful the federal government can be when it chooses to flex force instead of choosing community. Kids were playing soccer, families were walking their dogs, and teens were just hanging out, and suddenly they were surrounded by people with rifles and riot shields. Even though the Guard and Marines are finally being pulled back, the real question is why they were deployed in the first place. How can we make sure something like this doesn't become our new normal? Because if showing up in public spaces means risking a run-in with soldiers and ICE agents, then what does this say about our idea of freedom? What does that say about what it means to feel safe, especially as a young person in America? Now, while the Trump administration is finally pulling troops out of neighborhoods, there's another story this week that shows just how far we still have to go when it comes to justice in this country. This one doesn't involve soldiers in streets. It involves a courtroom, a federal case, and a single day in prison. I'm talking about the latest update in the Breonna Taylor case. This week, something happened that left me honestly speechless. The Department of Justice, through the Civil Rights Division, formally recommended that Brent Hankison, one of the officers involved in the raid that killed Breonna Taylor, serve just 1 day in prison. Yes, 1 day. Hankison was the only officer charged at the federal level in connection to the botched raid in Louisville, Kentucky, that resulted in the death of Breonna Taylor. His charged civil rights violations for firing blindly into her apartment and neighboring units, even though Breonna wasn't a suspect. The letter, signed by Assistant Attorney General Helmart K. Dillon, argued that Hankison had already suffered public humiliation and loss of employment, and therefore deserved leniency. The judge handling this case decided to give Mr. Hankison a 33-month sentence in prison, ignoring the Department of Justice's recommendation. Now, changing pace, we have to talk about the feud and political drama between Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and President Trump. Back in 2017, during President Trump's first term, he appointed Jerome Powell to serve as chair of the Federal Reserve. He and the other members of the Federal Reserve are America's money managers. They are tasked with setting interest rates, controlling inflation, and keeping the economy calm, managing the money flow, and watching over big banks. Even though the president does appoint members to the Federal Reserve, they operate independently and are not under the directive of the president. Recently, this month, President Trump had a meeting with a dozen House Republicans. During this meeting, he polled them on whether he should fire Mr. Powell from his post. Lately, however, President Trump has been backing down because the Federal Reserve Chair must have a legitimate reason for being removed from post, not just political reasoning. President Trump stated that Mr. Powell will likely finish out his term and will be out in 8 months. Shifting gears to a different building in Washington, Congress has approved President Trump's request to decrease the amount of funding given to foreign aid to other countries and funding for PBS and NPR. The Trump administration is cutting $9 billion, with $8 billion being in foreign aid and $1.1 billion being in the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funds PBS and NPR. Specifically, the Trump administration is defunding the Food for Peace nonprofit, which is a program that provides food assistance for other countries. They are also cutting funding for other global health programs. President Trump's reason for cutting funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or CBP, is that President Trump says that the companies funded by CBP, like PBS and NPR, have a bias against conservatives and promote what he calls left-wing propaganda. His other reason, though less said, is that he says that public media stations are no longer necessary because of the internet and private media. However, the president and Congress can't just cut funding because of bias. It is infringing upon CBP's rights to freedom of speech and freedom of press, which is a very simple concept that President Trump and the Trump administration doesn't seem to understand. This cut doesn't just impact big public media stations and companies, it impacts smaller ones as well. Small town radio stations and TV stations rely on the CBP with the help of the government to stay afloat. Without this funding, a lot of stations like these will go out of business fast, leaving millions of Americans uninformed and not up to date on current news. Now moving to the climate impacts of ChatGPT and other AI assistants, and how the Trump administration is going in the opposite direction and undoing years of work to slow the impacts of climate change. A new report from the Michigan Institute of Technology, or MIT, shows that the use of AI tools like ChatGPT use a massive amount of energy and electricity. The use of one language model can use as much energy to fly across the country hundreds of times. That's a large amount of energy. But that's not the real issue, however big. It's the fact that no one is talking about how we can make it better. As Gen Z, millions of teens and I are inheriting this earth. Shouldn't all of us on this planet be asking the question, is smarter tech worth a hotter planet? Speaking of climate change, the Trump administration is rolling back the exact protections that help slow climate change, undoing years of essential work. On President Trump's first day, he pulled us out of the Paris Agreement, an essential global climate change deal. He also declared an energy emergency due to fast-track oil drilling. The goal of this? More pipelines, more fossil fuels, and fewer rules related to climate. All of this while the rest of the world is attempting to slow down climate change. So here we are, AI is burning energy and the government is ignoring climate science. What is this administration leaving me and other people in my generation? Moving to President's health diagnosis. The President recently was diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency, which is when veins in legs cannot effectively return blood to the heart. This leads to pain in the legs after standing for long periods of time, which the President does. This reminds us that President Trump will be the oldest person in the office of president, a record formerly held by President Biden. If Trump finishes out his term, he will be 82 years old. Jumping across the lake, a major shift in democracy might be underway, and it starts with teens. On Thursday of last week, the British government announced plans to lower the national voting age to 16 years old, giving teenagers a chance to vote and elect members of parliament and even have a say in who becomes prime minister. If this plan is passed, it would give around 1.6 million new young voters the chance to have their voice heard in the next national election. This move could redefine what it means to be a modern democracy, where the government doesn't just serve older generations, but actually reflects the future it's trying to shape. This is a monumental moment, not just for the United Kingdom, but for global conversation about youth and power. For too long, teenagers have been told that they're too young to make political decisions, but this move says otherwise. It says that your voice matters, not just when you're older. But of course, with a big move comes big debate. Critics argue that 16-year-olds aren't mature enough or that they'll vote based on social media trends. But supporters say the opposite, that Gen Z is already leading protests and starting movements and shaping policy through their activism. If they're old enough to work and fight for change, why shouldn't they be old enough to vote? And this does more than just give teens a ballot. It could tilt the electoral playing field. Younger voters tend to vote and lean more progressive. So, if this becomes law in the United Kingdom, we could see a shift in policy and leadership, and even a shift in the global reputation of the United Kingdom. If the United Kingdom follows through, it would surely become a pillar of modern democracy, sending a message to countries like the United States that it's time to trust younger generations with real political power. Whether this becomes law or not, it raises one big question for the rest of us. If teens can vote in Britain, why can't we have it here? Now, as we wrap up this week's show, we have to talk about something serious: the fires in the Grand Canyon. One of the most iconic landmarks in the world, and a place where millions of people visit every year, has been literally burning since 4th of July. The fire, now known as Dragon Bravo Fire, started on the north rim of the park, and while officials originally believed it was manageable and possibly even helpful to the forest health, everything changed fast. Just a few days later, winds and heat caused the fire to explode in size, burning more than 11 acres and destroying at least 70 buildings, including part of the historic Grand Canyon Lodge. That's not just a park going up in flames, that's American history disappearing in real time. And while no lives have been lost, the damage is devastating. Hundreds of staff, visitors, and nearby residents were evacuated. Roads and trails were closed, and as of now, the fire is still not fully contained. There is no official cause, but the fact that it has been burning and did begin on 4th of July during one of the hottest times of the year has many questioning how prepared we are really for fires like this. Arizona's governor is now calling for an independent investigation, especially since the area was under fire restrictions. As someone from Gen Z, it's not hard to see that this is a part of something much bigger. Climate change is making wildfires more common, more dangerous, and harder to control. We can't keep treating fires like one-off disasters when they keep happening every year, in forests, in national parks, and in people's neighborhoods. If the Grand Canyon, a place known for strong, majestic, and permanent, can burn like this, what else is at risk? It's time for a wake-up call, and deserves more attention than it's getting. That's all I have for you today. If you liked today's episode, I hope you consider listening to this week's episode and sharing this with all your family and friends. Stay loud, stay smart. I'm Thaddeus, and this was the Teen Take.